Hey everybody, it's Jenna. I've seen a lot of people struggle to identify and describe this current point in time in superhero projects, beyond this meme, of course. Some have labeled it as the Renaissance or a new golden age, the latter of which I am personally not a fan of, both for how that phrase has been co-opted by a certain political forum, and because I think it misrepresents the specifics of where we're actually at. I'm here today to share my theory to best explain what the hell has happened in the past few years and what we seem to be on the cusp of. I think, surprise, surprise, you need to look at the history of the source material itself, the comics. In a lot of ways, we seem to be at the dawn of a silver age. Comics history is a funny thing. Even though I talk about it in basically every single video that I make on this channel, and I genuinely love doing so, it always feels daunting talking about it in broad historical strokes. You can easily go down an endless rabbit hole of books and scholarly works and documentaries and podcasts, all of which try to make sense of an art form that has only preserved random bits and pieces of its own history. I also recognize that, for a lot of people watching this might be the first time that you really hear about that history and those eras. So I will try to do my best without getting too far into the weeds. The beginning of the golden age of comics is, in many ways, undeniable. It's the debut of Superman in Action Comics #1, which hit newsstands in April of 1938. This was by no means the first comic book. The modern folded and stapled version of the format is believed to have begun with 1933's famous Funnies, A Carnival of Comics, and plenty of serialized, costume-wearing crime fighters appeared in the ensuing years after that, like The Shadow, Green Hornet, Dick Tracy, and Sheena. But Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's Action Comics #1 story, which in and of itself had undergone multiple creative evolutions before seeing print, unintentionally defined what we now know as a superhero story. In the span of just a few pages, the story presented Superman's origin story, his gimmick and costume, his secret identity and the supporting cast that surrounds him, his mission to do good, and the things in his environment that might get in the way of him doing so. Beyond that, Superman was simply an entertaining and distinct character who resonated with young readers, something I've already talked about in previous videos. Legend has it that the initial Action Comics #1 print run of 200,000 copies very quickly sold out, but that it took a beat for the publisher, National Allied Publications, to realize that Superman was the specific draw. In the ensuing years, everyone realized that Superman was the draw, and they quickly began to chase the hype with their own solo hero stories that had a similar structure to Action Comics #1. The market became flooded with characters of different costumes and gimmicks and publishers. Granted, not all of them had staying power. Many faded into obscurity as quickly as they debuted, thanks to an ambivalence from readers or even from the creators themselves, many of whom were on work-for-hire contracts and trying to pump out as many new franchises as possible to keep up with the demand. With hindsight, or just nostalgia in a medium that is constantly changing, many of these installments have since been reappraised as hidden classics. But as the Golden Age went on, a number of characters endured and found success, like Aquaman, Batman, Captain America, Captain Marvel, Dr. Fate, The Flash, Green Arrow, Green Lantern, Hawkman and Hawkgirl, Human Torch, Namor the Submariner, Plastic Man, and Wonder Woman. Some of these characters completely broke through the noise, adding revolutionary new tropes or details to the genre conventions set up by Action Comics #1. And some of these characters didn't try to reinvent the wheel, but they at least consistently entertained their audience, within the limited storytelling confines that the medium had at that point. There even became a joy in seeing these heroes cross over with each other. The genre conventions also became popular enough to be parodied, with the first and most enduring being Ma Hunkel, an unassuming working mother who puts a stock pot on her head and moonlights as the Red Tornado. Sure, the genre had kinks to work out, chief among them better representation for female superheroes and superheroes who weren't white, but it began to grow amid a captive audience, with comics selling as many as 1.4 million copies per issue. While they weren't the only popular comic genre, talking animal comics and teen comics like Archie often outsold them, superhero comics provided colorful and heroic escapism for a world that didn't know it needed it. What happened next is sometimes defined differently, as an ongoing part of the Golden Age or as the Atomic Age or the Code Era. The end of World War II led certain titles to pivot away from standard superhero fare, expanding into other genres like horror, romance, or war. There is no better example of this than Captain America's flagship book, which transformed into a horror title and wrote him out entirely in the span of only 5 issues. This accidentally collided with the rise of think pieces, arguing that comics were corrupting children's brains, promoting unconventional family values, and contributing to juvenile delinquency, a discourse spearheaded by psychiatrist and known liar Frederick Wertham. He is a whole separate can of worms in and of himself, but the short of it is that he based his crusade on case studies that we now know to have been largely misrepresented and falsified. But at the time, the sentiment caught on, as comics became banned in certain locations and even burned in mass bonfires, and a governing body known as the Comics Code Authority began to regulate what stories could or could not include. The majority of superhero comics struggled to hang on in this new status quo, with the adventures of countless heroes spinning their wheels, ending unceremoniously, or just losing the magic that audiences had grown to love. But the superhero genre wasn't completely down for the count. down. Some heroes, mainly at DC, survived being consistently published in the late 40s and early 50s, and the rise of another golden age of science fiction stories across multiple mediums proved that audiences still wanted some form of escapism. November 1955's Detective Comics number 225 saw the debut of Martian Manhunter, one of the first blends of the superhero tropes that audiences recognized and the larger genre quirks that they were currently craving. Less than a year later, October 1956's Showcase number 4 took this a step further with a rebooted version of The Flash, with a new name, a new sci-fi origin, and a snappier new storytelling formula that met the audience where it was at. The Silver Age of comics was born, and a number of superhero characters were rebooted or revived for the modern moment, both by themselves and in superhero teams filled with other big personalities. A number of new franchises were also set up, characters who were able to turn their flaws and messy emotions into action, just as a rising counterculture needed those exact kinds of heroes. These fresh new characters tried to strike a balance between character-driven drama and fantastical spectacle, in part because the techniques of the medium were only getting better and more robust. They worked to appeal to younger fans and definitely succeeded in that regard, while also having an unspoken acknowledgement of what came before, occasionally to the point of self-awareness. Some of this was because a second generation of creators had entered the field with an encyclopedic appreciation of the past, and some of it was just because it was fun to do. As an example, at first the adventures of the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, were fictional stories that the Silver Age Flash, Barry Allen, had voraciously read as a child. Just as in the Golden Age, not every Silver Age superhero succeeded, and some fans still spent their time clamoring for older things to return. In some instances, the older things did return as a fun gimmick, a form of closure, and a sort of blessing to the newer generation. But either way, the Silver Age brought the archetype of the superhero back to life. It was no longer seen as childish or embarrassing to enjoy the tights and flights. If anything, it was a fictional world that kept reflecting its own unique version of our real world, and that would only evolve further and get more experimental in the decades to come. For the longest time, I have hated calling superhero movies and shows a genre. Yes, this has often led me to sound like the MCU mob flick meme that has gone around for the past couple years, but I often felt like it minimized the individual quirks and stylistic choices of each project to just lump them all together. I wasn't alone in this thinking, as comic writer Grant Morrison argued in 2009 that, quote, "I'm not even sure if there is a superhero genre or if the idea of a superhero is a special chili pepper-like ingredient designed to energize other genres. But by definition, of structures that, quote, shape the production and marketing of particular films and manage the expectations of both critics and audiences towards them, and are marked by distinct, quote, functions, pleasures, audiences, modes of involvement, styles of interpretation, and text-reader relationships, superhero adaptations are undeniably a genre. In the 21st century alone, audiences have gotten into a habit of expecting snappy dialogue, villains that mirror their protagonists, big blue beams in the sky, some sort of slow motion, and after-credit scenes in the movies, and certain character archetypes and season-long story beats on the cable television shows.
The city's under attack, must be May.
Even more recently, there have been expectations of a needlessly spoiled cameo in a film's final trailer, a Disney Plus hero getting a costume upgrade in the penultimate episode of their show, and even a badly 80-yard line in a Sony trailer. So, if superhero movies and shows are definitely their own genre, what has the life cycle of that genre been like? Did it begin with the one-off serials of the 1940s, or did it begin with the cultural touchstones like Superman the movie, Batman 66, Batman 89, the Wonder Woman TV show, and The Incredible Hulk? In my mind, no. As much as those projects have bits of iconography or shared DNA with where we ultimately ended up, they were pieces of different trends in film and television history, the birth of the blockbuster or the rise of genre television. Sure, they might have run for multiple seasons or multiple sequels, but their successes didn't lead the larger industry to immediately make a glut of similar superhero adaptations. There were plenty of failed attempts to do so, particularly with Spider-Man and the X-Men, or just a complete misunderstanding of what audiences were responding to, as evidenced by Batman 89, leading to a lot of 90s pulp films like Dick Tracy, The Shadow, and The Phantom. People to this day still have wildly different arguments as to what started the superhero boom, but in my mind, even the surprise hits like Blade and Unbreakable and even the Ninja Turtles still fall into this nebulous category. The shift from movies and shows that happen to feature superhero characters to what we now expect from a superhero adaptation can really be traced to the 2000s. Something definitely shifted with Fox's first X-Men movie and Sony's first Spider-Man movie a few years later. Movies that still fit into the confines of the action genre, but started to break the mold in ways that would best suit their colorful characters. Soapy dialogue and relationships, cutting-edge visual effects, and varying degrees of preposterous costumes. While the respective productions were spearheaded by a lifelong comic fan and someone who banned comics on set, the influences definitely started to break through. Kevin Feige, who associate produced the first X-Men movie and would of course go on to run Marvel Studios, later argued that, quote, "I never liked the idea that people weren't attempting things because of the potential for them to look silly. Anything in a comic book has the potential to look silly. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to make it look cool." Both movies exceeded expectations at the box office previous, becoming full-fledged franchises that traded off being the superhero movie of the summer for most of the 2000s. And unlike the projects of the previous decades, their successes and their various quirks started a genuine trend of other superhero characters getting their own blockbuster films or shows to varying degrees of success. There was still a lot of trial and error and flaws, even within the X-Men and Spider-Man franchises themselves, but there was a sense that audiences really enjoyed following these superhero stories, both as escapism and inspiration amid a volatile real-world climate. If X-Men and Spider-Man began to chip the glass, it shattered entirely in the summer of 2008, with the release of both Marvel's Iron Man and Warner Brothers' The Dark Knight. On paper, the two could not have been more different from each other. One starred a virtually unknown character who sounded like a cool toy to children's focus groups, with a script that was actively being written on the fly. The other was a sequel starring one of the most iconic superheroes of all time, continuing an ultra-gritty, anarchy-filled crime drama approach that even its director was surprised was successful the first time around. Both showed very different shades of the world in 2008, dominating the box office in the process, while defining how a superhero story could be told on screen, much like Action Comics #1 had done on the page decades prior. Iron Man showed a story arc and tone, impressive computer-generated graphics, and a world-outside-your-window approach that could, and soon was, applied to a roster of characters. The Dark Knight, meanwhile, showed that a past of shark repellent and bat nipples couldn't stop any character from becoming cool and gritty and relevant again, and maybe even a major awards contender in the process. Given the nature of film production, it took a little bit of time for the effects of these two movies to be felt, but Marvel Studios, Warner Brothers, and nearly every other studio around them that could began to follow the tropes and storytelling structure set by these two movies. Much like the golden age of comics, not every installment was successful. Many of them faded into obscurity as quickly as they debuted, thanks to an ambivalence from the audience or even from the cast and crew themselves. With hindsight or just nostalgia in a medium that is constantly changing, many of these installments have suddenly been reappraised as hidden classics. But the superhero boom was undeniable, and a lot of characters and franchises of varying sizes benefited from it. Some of these installments broke through the noise, adding revolutionary new tropes or details that would soon be emulated elsewhere. And plenty didn't try to reinvent the wheel, but at least consistently entertained their audience. There even became a joy in seeing these heroes cross over with each other, to the point of everything becoming a franchise. Marvel Studios turned Iron Man's miraculous success into an ever-growing Marvel Cinematic Universe with a larger web of projects that may or may not be connected to that main canon. Fox's X-Men universe continued to endure for another decade amid some massive highs and lows. Sony produced 2 more Spider-Man reboots, 3 if you count one of the best animated films of all time, and DC had varying degrees of success on both the big and small screen, but still had a number of projects that undeniably became a cultural moment. Sure, the genre had kinks to work out, chief among them better representation for female superheroes and superheroes who weren't white, but it began to grow amid a captive audience, with box office grosses ballooning to astronomical levels. While they weren't the only popular genre, superhero movies and shows provided colorful and heroic escapism for a world that didn't know it needed it. Sound familiar? The turning point for the superhero movie and show as we had known it arrived in 2019 and early 2020. Avengers Endgame had just put a bow on the MCU's 11 years of interconnected storytelling, Joker had grossed $1 billion by adapting comic concepts into a thinly veiled remake of Taxi Driver, and the CW's Arrowverse of interconnected television shows had just pulled off its Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, threading the needle between decades of DC TV shows. There were plenty of places for things to go, and thanks to the trend of slate announcements and post-credit scenes and tell-all interviews, the audience was told what that might entail, only for a lot of it to not come to fruition. The COVID-19 pandemic changed the timeline of when productions were made and released, the opportunity to see them in a massive theater with other screaming fans, as well as just the viewing habits of an audience that maybe wanted to shift to watching other genres or watching parodies making fun of the genre, or who felt perfectly satisfied after Endgame or Crisis or the confusion of the DC Extended Universe. The debate still rages to this day as to whether or not keeping up with the past couple years of the MCU has felt like homework, something that Kevin Feige even apparently agrees with, but the fact of the matter is that it was homework with little to no benefit of doing it. Across the MCU, the remnants of the Arrowverse and the DCEU, and Sony's fledgling and often baffling Spider-Man universe, release schedules shifted around, larger franchise connections went nowhere, and characters were introduced with no clear indication of if and when we would see them again. Every time I talk about this time, I think about a quote from writer Jeff Johns about the direction of DC's New 52 reboot, arguing that it felt like, quote, "We're dropped into an open field, here's your character, we're going to relaunch it," and then you look around and think, well, which direction am I supposed to go in? This accidentally collided with fandoms getting more tribalistic, as well as the rise of think pieces and honestly just pointless internet vitriol, arguing that these movies or shows becoming more diverse at all was corrupting the audience's brain, promoting unconventional family values, or directly causing the studio's multitude of creative snafus. Occasionally, a superhero title would bring back a version of the monoculture and start to recapture the magic. The WandaVision hype will always have a special place in my heart, and some of my personal favorite superhero movies and shows were brought to life during this era, but it is undeniable that something had shifted. Just like in the late Golden Age, the adventures of countless heroes in the 2020s have spun their wheels, ended unceremoniously, lost the magic that audiences had once expected, or had their great creative efforts buried under a mountain of quote-unquote content. As James Gunn put it in a 2023 interview, quote, "I think there is such a thing as superhero fatigue. I think it doesn't have anything to do with superheroes. It has to do with the kind of stories that get to be told, and if you lose your eye on the ball, which is character. We love Superman, we love Batman, we love Iron Man, because they're these incredible characters that we have in our hearts. If it becomes just a bunch of nonsense on screen, it gets really boring. But I get fatigued by most spectacle films by the grind of not having an emotionally grounded story. It doesn't have anything to do with whether they're superhero movies or not. If you don't have a story at the base of it, just watching things bash each other, no matter how clever those bashing moments are, no matter how clever the designs and the VFX are, it just gets fatiguing, and I think that's very, very real." As Peter Coogan puts it in his 2006 book Superhero: The Secret Origin of a Genre, quote, "Genres evolve when the narrative resolution of social conflict no longer holds true for the audience, which responds by not buying the product, which in turn leads the producers to increase the level of complexity and self-consciousness of the story formulas and conventions to satisfy the audience. This conversation continues through the cycle of genre evolution until it makes a complete round and a genre breaks down for both the producers and the consumers. The conventions of the genre are then reconstructed and the genre is made to work again." This is exactly why I wanted to make this video, because I can see this evolution happening in our current landscape of superhero movies and shows. It truly feels like we're at the start of Some of that energy is thanks to real-world inside baseball stuff. Marvel moving away from Kang the Conqueror as their multiverse-destroying big bad, the 2023 writers' strike leading Marvel to reconfigure their approach to scripts and television development, the apparent end, for now, of Sony's Spider-Man universe, at least on the big screen, and James Gunn and Peter Safran being brought on to run a revamped DC Studios. Across the board, there seems to not only be an approach of quality over quantity, but of rebooting or reviving or simply properly adapting these characters in a way that suits our current moment and genuinely excites audiences. Not unlike what kickstarted the Silver Age of comics. Characters are fleshed out in more satisfying ways, the worlds are constructed with less gratuitous green screen and more of a practical attention to detail, and the tone and sense of humor are able to vary depending on the character. Not unlike the Silver Age of comics, there is still an unspoken acknowledgement of what came before, because they know that almost everyone has experienced the superhero boom in some way, but a sense that what's arriving will be fresh and new and awe-inspiring once again for fans of all ages. There are also an ever-growing number of unabashed comic fans spearheading these adaptations, not unlike the comic creators who started in the Silver Age, although I will always mourn the fact that the Marvel's director Nia DaCosta wasn't given her flowers for a very similar approach. And not unlike the Silver Age of comics, the starting point is also debatable, as some franchises are going to carry over because there's arguably no better way to adapt their specific protagonists, or because their work was produced before the shift was made, or some projects, specifically 2022's The Batman, have already struck a chord with audiences in this kind of way. But it definitely feels to me like we're on the cusp of that new age now. After the positive response to Daredevil Born Again and The Penguin on the small screen, Thunderbolt's reinvigorating the Marvel fandom in a way that I genuinely haven't seen since 2012, the awe-inspiring fervor around this summer's Superman and the Fantastic Four First Steps, and the fact that Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars already have us glued to a live stream of chairs for an entire workday. Just like I argued that the summer of 2008 properly kickstarted the golden age of superhero adaptations, I really think that July of 2025 will do for the genre what Barry Allen's debut in Showcase number 4 did for the comics. Like with every previous era so far, not every superhero adaptation in this Silver Age is going to be a smash success, and there will always be some fans who spend their time clamoring for older things to return, some of whom will be a lot luckier than others. But either way, these next few years have the potential to really revive the superhero movie and TV show on screen, for the better. As James Gunn explained earlier this year, quote, "We don't want these characters to die out. We want to bring new stories and new life. We want to introduce these characters to new generations." And I think we are doing that slowly but surely. I recognize that I'm making this claim at basically the start of the Silver Age, and that there's always a possibility that something could happen and everything could crash out and crater in the next few years anyway. But I don't think that it will, because the fact of the matter is, we will always be telling superhero stories. That's not even me just being optimistic as a fan, or me recognizing that the IP of Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and the X-Men are too big to not get reboots as long as there is an active film industry. In my mind, there will always be a need for the specific tropes and heroism and escapism that superheroes provide. It just needed to grow and evolve like we do. Steven Spielberg's 2015 quote about how superhero movies will one day go the way of the Western has always frustrated me because the Western still existed decades after its supposed end. It just evolved into spaghetti Westerns and the installments of the 80s and 90s. It's the kind of evolution that basically every film genre has gone through over time, and that the medium of comics has gone through over and over again for nearly a century. It might feel like growing pains when you're in it in the moment, but superhero adaptations were innate of that evolution too, and that is not a bad thing. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you haven't already done so. Merch is available at the link in the description. As always, you can find me on social media at Hey It's Jenna Lynn. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, go read some comics.